Rothbury is set deep in the Cheviot Hills of Northumberland to create another town portrait.
Before the union of the crowns, when the reavers brought terror to these lawless lands, a strong house was essential. All down the valley of the River Coquet in Northumberland, peel towers and bastle houses dotted the landscape. In Rothbury, even the vicar had a tower, Witton Tower, on the hillside just outside the town, a clear indication of just how turbulent and violent the history of this place has been. 3.5 centuries later, it's difficult to imagine all that lawlessness. Rothbury today is a quiet Northumberland town set in a peaceful, natural landscape. But Rothbury has a long history. It probably started mainly because it was a convenient place to cross the river. It's got this fine medieval bridge with a concrete top. I don't suppose the concrete top's medieval. But in fact, the town is much older than that. There are prehistoric forts on the hills all around. It was an important Saxon settlement. And the name, Rothbury, is Danish, Viking. So you can see there have been layers and layers of history taking place here. But apart from the bridge, and of course the church with its typical Northumbrian long 13th century chancel, there aren't many really old buildings left. Nevertheless, it's a lucky town because the response of almost everybody who first comes into it is to say, "Oh, this is nice." That's because of the trees and the general shape of this broad, split-level main street. It's a very agreeable and a very harmonious picture. Up here on the shopping level, there's a great range of shops. Where else might you find a milk bar? I thought they'd gone out with my childhood. A shop selling handmade shoes. Double gates to a yard decorated with iron grills. It reminds me of France. Or this magnificent chip shop run by a gentleman called Les Vertus. Or perhaps, thinking of those Frenchy-looking gates, it should be Les Vertus. Variety and yet harmony. And what we have to realise is that this harmony is in no way accidental. It's the result of centuries of fitting in with the people next door. In Rothbury, like in most small towns, the main architectural statement is made by the big Victorian banks. The banks that we know today date mainly from after the passing of the Joint Stock Acts in 1826 and 1833. Of course, there'd been banks before that time, but the big public banks are mainly from after then. In a sense, they were like railway stations. They were something new on the urban scene, and architects had to decide upon a style for them, and they tended on the whole to choose the classical style. Impressive, solidly respectable. Like this one here. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder about Rothbury because this one's got a French roof. When you get a roof like that with a double pitch to it, it's called a mansard roof, and it's absolutely typical of France. Actually, it's quite a restrained building, but nevertheless packed with creative detail. Those moulded surrounds to the windows are called architraves, and when they've got sticky outy bits at the top, they're called eared architraves or lugged architraves. The windows are interesting too. When you see one with small paned upper sash and a plate glass lower sash, that normally means that it was put in between about 1880 and about 1900. And if you look at the bottom of the upper sash, you can see those sticky downy bits. Well, those are called horns, and they were invented around about 1850 or 60. So any window that doesn't have them is likely to be older than that. It's funny how that word Victorian still seems to have a ring of criticism about it, as if we're talking about something phony or excessively serious. Well, these are Victorian. They're almshouses. They were built by Lord Armstrong, who lived at Cragside up the road, and I think they're lovely. I like these even more. Addicombe cottages, designed in 1873 by Norman Shaw, the architect of Cragside. I love the way the porches climb up the hill. Round the back here, all the elements are arranged together with such strength and such care. To my mind, it's like a piece of abstract sculpture. Terraced backyards, and yet what simple, bold design. Eminently practical, and aren't they beautifully kept? They're also a conservation success story. Thought of as slums only 10 years ago, in 1976, there were strong moves to have them demolished. But someone had them listed. And now, thanks to the Cheviot Housing Association, they've been beautifully restored and preserved for posterity. It goes without saying that Cragside itself is listed. Now enjoyed by everybody since the National Trust opened it to the public, Cragside was once the home of Lord Armstrong, the industrial and armaments baron of Victorian Tyneside. What I like about Rothbury is that its good buildings continue right into the 20th century. This house was also built for a Tyneside industrialist, but not until 1921. It was designed by the Newcastle architect Robert Mocklin for Sir Angus Watson, who'd made his money out of pilchards. Witton Grange here, which is not open to the public, is a very beautiful house in 17th century style. But the elements are put together with a certain 20th century freedom. Mocklin was a good architect, but even better as a designer of gardens. He worked a year or two later with the great architect Edwin Lutyens on the gardens at Blagden Hall near Newcastle, and their similarity of style can be seen here, in the variety of texture, shape, formality and informality. And finally, a folly. It was built about 1720 by the vicar, Archdeacon Sharp, partly, they say, to give the unemployed something to do. Was it the job creation scheme of its time? And partly to satisfy his enthusiasm for astrology. It's a useless building, but splendid, a reminder that townscapes are made up as much by personal statements as by the carefully considered blueprints of the planners. And that's still happening today. Even with a caravan, you can stamp your own personality on the scene. Josie and Bill Miller live here for 6 months of every year, and they've created a beautiful and highly individual garden. And they've painted their bit of townscape, just like Norman Shaw and Robert Mocklin, and the builders of those medieval peel towers did before them.